Coming up, Rishi Sunak under pressure to comment on the Boris Johnson Partygate report. How high will they go? New fears over mortgages as some deals hit more than 6%. And not Harry Styles or Taylor Swift, how Ed Sheeran is still the most played artist in the UK. What does Rishi Sunak think of Boris Johnson lying to Parliament? The current Prime Minister isn't yet telling, leading to pressure from Labour urging him to show leadership by casting a vote on Mr Johnson's Partygate punishment.
This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
Also this lunchtime, in a big week for mortgages, 2-year deals go above 6%. We'll get reaction. David Cameron at the COVID inquiry. The former Prime Minister says it was a mistake to focus on a flu pandemic. And
ooh, I love it when you do it like that. When you
on radio, in the pub and in your home, Ed Sheeran is the UK's most played artist once again.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Does the current Prime Minister think the former one, Boris Johnson, should be punished for misleading Parliament over lockdown parties? We don't know. Rishi Sunak has so far refused to say whether he will vote on the report into Mr Johnson's behaviour. It will be debated in the Commons later today. This lunchtime, Downing Street said the Prime Minister didn't wish to influence the decision of MPs ahead of that debate. But the silence from Mr Sunak has left him exposed to criticism from Labour, who are calling for him to show leadership. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
Tory MPs have descended on Uxbridge today, campaigning for votes in Boris Johnson's old constituency. It's almost as if they're avoiding having to vote themselves in Parliament on the behaviour that led him to quit Uxbridge in the first place. The Prime Minister is avoiding the question too.
This is a matter for the House rather than for the government. It's an important distinction, and that's why I wouldn't want to influence anyone in advance of that vote.
But you promised professionalism, accountability, integrity at every level. Boris Johnson has undermined all of those. Do you not need to set an example and vote for him to be punished for that?
As I said, this is a matter for the House. It's not a government matter.
What makes this so uncomfortable for Conservative MPs is that a committee they dominate said all these statements were lies.
I have been repeatedly assured that there was no party and that no COVID rules were broken. All guidance was followed completely during number 10. I did not lie to the House.
And yet many Tory members and voters still quite like Boris Johnson. There are Conservative MPs who think, though, that this is too important to dodge.
If there is a vote tonight, and it's not certain yet whether there will be, I will vote to support the committee's report.
Why are you going to do that?
If any member of the House of Commons misleads the House of Commons, the problem then is you can't trust anything that's said and democracy can't function.
Labour say all those Tory MPs out campaigning in Uxbridge should come back to Parliament this afternoon.
I think their constituents will not understand them giving excuses or being found to be outside of the House of Commons and not able to get back to vote for it, given how significant this is. I think that applies from the Prime Minister all the way down through the Parliamentary Conservative Party.
This morning, the Prime Minister's spokesman said Mr Sunak would be hosting the Swedish Prime Minister in Downing Street this afternoon and then had a series of meetings, and that his schedule does not currently include attending Parliament.
Carl, what happened under the former Prime Minister's watch is still impacting the current one.
Yeah, very much so. The opposition parties using this as a stick to beat some very uncomfortable Conservative MPs who don't want to upset their own supporters by condemning Boris Johnson, even if they do feel that he ought to be punished to some extent. I mean, some of them say that although the committee was right, its punishment was actually too much, and they've given that a reason for abstaining. That's what Michael Gove has said is the reason he won't be voting in this today. It is also the whole Partygate saga still being looked at by the police, believe it or not. This morning, the Metropolitan Police said they were looking at meetings Boris Johnson had in Downing Street and Chequers, allegations of a party in Parliament. That's one that we think was attended by Bernard Jenkin, one of the MPs on the Privileges Committee, and also that video that many people have seen over the weekend of a party held in Conservative Party headquarters in December 2020 when parties were against the law. None of those are being formally investigated by the police, but they're assessing the information to decide whether or not to launch formal investigations.
Carl, looking ahead to what will happen in the Commons later, take us through how all of that will unfold.
Well, we think the debate on all of this will start at around 4:30. There are quite a lot of people, I expect most of them opposition MPs, who want to speak, so it could go on for a few hours. Then the chair of the Privileges Committee, Harriet Harman, will wrap it up. What happens then will be that the Speaker will ask all those in favour of accepting the report to say aye. A lot of people shot aye. All those against say no. And then it depends how many people say no. Boris Johnson has asked his supporters not to oppose it. If very few of them say no, there won't actually be a vote. It will just go through, as they say, on the nod. It will be accepted by Parliament, but without a formal vote.
OK. Carl Dinnan, thank you very much. Thank you. On Thursday, the Bank of England will announce whether it will raise interest rates again to try to bring down inflation. The average mortgage rate for a 2-year fixed deal is now 6.01%. The rate for a 5-year deal is currently 5.67%. It's the highest rates have been since December, after the volatility caused by the then Prime Minister Liz Truss's mini budget. I'm joined now by our economics editor, Joel Hills. More financial pain for many more people then.
Yeah, look, it's the highest it's been for years, let's be clear, and very different to the picture just a year ago. I think what's alarming here, Nina, though, is that in the last 4 weeks, interest rates, as set by the Bank of England, have not budged, and yet we've seen this spike in mortgage rates. In the same period of time, they've risen by 0.7%. No wonder everyone is concerned. Now, the upheaval was triggered, of course, by data on the 22nd of May last month, which showed that inflation was falling far more slowly than had been expected. And what we saw then is banks and building societies scrambling to reprice their mortgage deals. Now, Rightmove this morning calls the mortgage market disorderly, although the asking price for the average property listed on its website stood at £372,000. I think we can see here in the 4 weeks to the 10th of June. That's basically unchanged from May, and it's actually higher than it was a year ago. So what estate agents and sellers seem to be thinking is that all of this upheaval won't be affecting house prices. Most economists disagree. They see house prices as falling, in some cases very, very sharply in the months ahead.
Joel, what are all the political parties saying?
Well, there's been a political frenzy, as you'd imagine, over the next 18 months, in the run-up to another general election, of course. Around 2.5 million households on fixed-rate deals will have to refinance. They will be materially worse off as a result. The Liberal Democrats are asking, as we know, the government to make direct interventions to help people out that get into problems. This is what the Prime Minister had to say about that idea this morning.
Yeah, so I know the anxiety that people will have about mortgage rate. That's why the first priority I set out at the beginning of the year was to halve inflation, because that's the best and most important way that we can keep costs and interest rates down for people. We've got a clear plan to do that. It is delivering. We need to stick to the plan.
But there is
also support available for people. We have the mortgage guarantee scheme for first-time buyers, and we have the support for mortgage interest scheme, which is there to help people as well.
OK, no extra support is the clear message there. Labour's calling the spike in mortgage rates the Tory premium. Last September, when Liz Truss blew up the bond market, I mean, there was a clear link between the spike in mortgage rates and and government policy. Less so the case here. In fact, this seems to have everything to do with, all the evidence suggests, is it's simply lenders seeing that inflation looks higher than it should be, and anticipating that interest rates will be higher for longer and repricing accordingly. Interesting to note that the PM's ruled out direct assistance. The Labour Party is not arguing for it either.
Joel Hills, thank you very much. Thank you. The Labour leader has pledged to reverse a ban on new onshore wind farms in England should his party win the next general election. Sir Keir Starmer also reiterated plans to set up a new publicly owned green energy company which would be based in Scotland. Sir Keir also said Labour would ban all new oil and gas projects, although current plans would be maintained. Oil and Gas Trade Association, Offshore Energy and the Unite and GMB trade unions warn the move could cost thousands of jobs and deter investment. The Coronation Street star Michael Lavelle is giving evidence in the hacking trial against the Mirror Group newspapers. The actor claims the Mirror titles used unlawful methods to obtain and publish highly private details about his life for 2 decades. The publisher denies any illegal activity. Rebecca Barry has been following the case at the High Court and joins me now. Rebecca, what's been said in court so far today?
Well, Michael Turner, who's known by his stage name Michael Lavelle, has been in the witness box and he's being cross-examined about his allegations against Mirror Group newspapers. The actor who plays Kevin Webster in Coronation Street is one of 4 claimants in this case, including, of course, Prince Harry. Michael Turner claims that 28 articles published in the Daily Mirror, the Sunday Mirror and the People were the result of either phone hacking or other illegal tactics. He says that articles published in 2011 after he was arrested for alleged sexual offences, of which he was later found not guilty, and about the breakdown of his marriage make his blood boil. He says quotes in those articles are incredibly suspicious because they reflect exactly what he was feeling at the time and would have told friends, often via voicemail. He says that his world was falling apart and he was blaming every Tom, Dick and Harry for what he thought were leaks to the newspapers. He says that stories about him out shopping or on holiday with his family were creepy, disgusting and leave him uneasy to this day. But lawyers for Mirror Group newspapers insist that there is no evidence of any voicemail interception or unlawful information gathering relating to him. And they've spent the morning trying to prove that information in these stories could have come from other places, that they were already out in the public domain or could have come from crew members on Coronation Street or tip-offs from members of the public. Michael Lavelle is the last claimant to give evidence in this trial, which is due to end next week.
Rebecca Barry, thank you. David Cameron has given evidence at the COVID inquiry. The former Prime Minister admitted that his government spent too much time preparing for a flu pandemic. He also defended accusations that the cuts to public services under his leadership led to the country being badly prepared. Our Deputy Political Editor, Anushka Asthana, is at the inquiry and joins me now. Anushka, take us through exactly what Mr Cameron said today.
Well, after he arrived here this morning, David Cameron began by arguing that when he became Prime Minister in 2010, he put in place structures, in particular the National Security Council, that were meant to be all about focusing Prime Ministers' minds on threats like this, like terrorism, like climate change, but also like pandemics. But as you say, he admitted that it was a failure of that period, that they focused on the wrong pandemic. He said not enough questions were asked about a type of illness like COVID. They focused on much more deadly coronaviruses that didn't spread as much, but as you say, mainly on flu. And that's a problem because planning for flu involves different things. As scientists tell me, it spreads much more quickly. They were able to stockpile Tamiflu and vaccines. And he actually gave one particular example about what it meant on PPE.
Hospitals in Hong Kong had to have 3 months of PPE supplies. I was never asked, can we have funding for 3 months PPE supplies for every hospital? But had I been asked, we would have granted it. That's not expensive. That's not a huge commitment. But that comes out of planning for the right sort of pandemic.
Now, you might say, why wasn't he asking those questions? But it was pretty clear that he was suggesting scientists were not giving him that information at the time. Now, the other big issue that came up was austerity. Did his financial policy to really constrain budgets, leave the NHS in a poor state when the pandemic hit. The British Medical Association today have suggested it did, that it left things in a parlous state. He really defended himself against that. He argued that you had to have economic resilience, otherwise you wouldn't have been able to cope with the planning that was needed when the pandemic did hit. But lots of critics disagree with him.
Anushka, thank you. Still to come, why some pints in pubs are becoming weaker. And why the sound of Sheeran has topped the charts again. But first, 9 men have appeared in court in Greece charged with people smuggling after a fishing boat capsized with hundreds of people on board. It is feared 500 people, including women and children, drowned in the tragedy, one of the worst the Mediterranean has seen. Our senior international correspondent, John Irvine, is in Kalamata, where the men appeared, and sent this update about their appearance in court.
Well, the 9 Egyptian men who appeared here today face a litany of charges, including negligent homicide, causing a shipwreck, and belonging to a criminal organisation. Their lawyers have been saying that all of them will plead not guilty, claiming that they are ordinary migrants rather than traffickers. I think it's important to note that all the defendants are men, as are all the survivors. All the bodies that have been recovered are those of men, and yet we know there were many women and children on this stricken vessel. When it had to be abandoned, it was a case, it seems, of every man for himself. Women and children not even last, but not at all. The court proceedings will resume here tomorrow morning.
John Irvine reporting. The driver of a Croydon tram that crashed, killing 7 people, has been cleared at the Old Bailey of causing it. Alfred Doris was driving it when it came off the tracks in 2016. He left the dock in tears. And a man who wore an offensive football shirt to the FA Cup final referencing the Hillsborough disaster has been banned from games for 4 years. James White, who's 33, smiled and chuckled after the banning order was made. He was also fined £1,000 and ordered to pay a surcharge of £400. Next this lunchtime, why some of the most popular beers sold in pubs and shops are becoming weaker. It's down to new alcohol taxes, which will be based on the strength of the drink from August and the cost of living crisis. Our correspondent Rachel Younger is at a brewery in South London. Rachel.
Yes, well, we have come to London's Beer Lane. It felt like the correct place to get a taste of what is really happening in the UK's beer industry. We're here under the arches amongst a number of independent brewers. I can tell you that their alcohol levels are being safely maintained, but that's not the case with some of the bigger names in brewing. Let's have a look at some of them, and you'll see that Foster's, which is made by Heineken, it has seen its alcohol per volume go down from 4 to 3.7%. Old Speckled Hen here, another name you might recognise, over the past year, down from 5 to 4.8%. And then round the corner, just here, Bishop's Finger. And again, they've seen a fall from 5.4 to 5.2%. Now, that might not seem much, but because of the way that taxes work, it means that less is paid on each bottle or can, around 2 or 3 pence each. And critics say this simply isn't being passed on to customers. Now, Heineken have told us this morning that this wasn't something they introduced by stealth, that it was communicated to their customers, supermarkets and pubs at the end of last year, and that anyway, consumers are increasingly choosing drinks with a lower alcohol content. All the manufacturers here also mention the rising costs associated with brewing. And I wanted to talk to Federico Muniz, who is the master brewer here, to see whether he has some sympathy with that argument. Federico, you haven't changed your alcohol contents, but you are struggling with these rising costs.
We are struggling quite a lot with the rising costs. From the malt to the hops, every single thing that we use in the producing the beer, we end up costing like 30% more of what it used to cost before. So that's quite a struggle to try not to pass everything to the customers. So we will have to get a hit into that and split it between the customers and us, sadly.
And of course, the question every beer drinker will want to know, very briefly, is whether reducing the alcohol content has an impact on taste.
No, I don't think you will feel it on the taste. After a few pints, you will definitely feel it. I just found it a little bit cheeky because when we have like that 0.5, we don't do it on purpose. When it's deliberate, that's when it gets a little bit more cheeky.
Right, and I suppose at least these big manufacturers are admitting it. If you want to seek solace in a pint, I'm afraid to tell you that if it's one of the bigger names, for good or for ill, there may be a little less alcohol in it than you were used to.
Rachel Younger, thank you. Finally, this lunchtime, Ed Sheeran has topped all the charts again. He was the most heard artist on radio, on streaming services and in many public places like pubs, shopping centres and restaurants last year. Here's Sally Biddulph on Sheeran's success and the huge stars he beat.
Conversations with a stranger I barely know.
Wherever you were last year, whatever you were doing, it's odds on an Ed Sheeran song would have provided the soundtrack. In the background, broadcast and streamed, the 32-year-old was heard everywhere, with hits like Bad Habits, Shivers and Two Step, making him the most played artist of 2022. Ed has made the top spot for 6 of the past 8 years, leading from the front for British pop, which is enjoying a golden age on a global stage.
There's a number of artists that have done really well over the last few years. So, I mean, one thing I'd kind of point out is that British music particularly is doing really well. So in terms of the numbers, British music overall is doing fantastically. So Ed Sheeran has, as you say, topped the list a number of times, but we've got the likes of Dua Lipa, Adele, Lewis Capaldi, Becky Hill, George Ezra. There's loads of names that have come up a number of times actually in the last few years. And again, I think it's just a testament to how well British pop music is doing.
8 of the top 10 last year were British artists. Behind Ed was Dua Lipa in second, French DJ David Guetta in third, with Harry Styles and Elton John in fourth and fifth respectively. Even megastar Taylor Swift only made it to 10th. Sheeran said in a statement, "Thanks to everyone who continues to listen to and enjoy my music. I never take it for granted." With his sights now set on 2023, the charts countdown has already begun. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
That's it this lunchtime. Mary's here with the evening news at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.
Today will be lovely to start with before quickly spreading to all parts later. Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.
Hello, a very good afternoon to you. A humid start to the week across the UK with heavy spells of showery rain at times. We can see on the latest satellite and radar image heavy rain across parts of western Scotland, which will continue through this afternoon. Elsewhere across England, Wales, Northern Ireland, a scattering of heavy showers and warm sunshine with temperatures in the southeast reaching 26 degrees. Heading into this evening, the rain across the north begins to ease off, most places having a quiet night in store once any showers die away after around 7 or 8 o'clock this evening. Down to the southwest, however, there's a band of heavy rain moving into the southwest of England and Wales before dawn. Temperature-wise tonight, quite warm for sleeping again, double figures throughout. On to tomorrow, that rain pushes up into the north of England by the morning rush hour, so take care on the roads. Lots of surface water and spray associated with it as it pushes northwards into the afternoon. To the south of that rain and to the west, heavy thundery showers and warm sunshine. Bye-bye.
Heinz Seriously Good Mayonnaise sponsors ITV National Weather.